Good morning or good afternoon. This week we're going to be talking about related quantities and dependent and independent variables. So if you recall, variables are letters or symbols that take the place temporarily of numbers. Dependent variables are letters or symbols that rely on the quantities of the independent variable. Independent variables are variables that are given a specific number or a specific quantity based on a word problem or an equation. Here's an example. If you're making one batch of brownies, your recipe calls for 2 eggs and 1 cup of flour. If you want to make larger batches, you need to increase your eggs and your flour. So your batches are the independent variables, and your eggs and flour are the dependent variables. The number of eggs and flour you need depends on the number of batches you make. Therefore, eggs and flour are dependent variables. This is a chart. We talked about this when we did ratios. So if you look at batches, you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. For one batch, the eggs are 2. For 2 batches, the eggs are 4. For 3 batches, the eggs are 6. For 4 batches, the eggs are 8. And flour, for one batch, you have 1 cup of flour. 2 batches, 2 cups of flour. 3 batches, 3 cups of flour. 4 batches, 4 cups of flour, etc. So the independent variable is the batches. You determine that amount. And then the dependent variable is the eggs. Depends on how many batches you make, how many eggs you need. Depends on how many batches you make, how much flour you need. So we practice this in our lesson during the week. If I want to make pink and red paint, pink paint, I need red and white paint. So if I have 2 parts red and 3 parts white, that makes my original pink. So my independent variable is the amount of gallons I need. So I want to make pink paint to paint a room. I discover that 1 gallon of paint only gets me 3/4 of the room covered. My store only sells paint in gallons, so I have to buy 2 gallons of paint, since 1 gallon isn't enough. My ratio of red to white paint is 2 to 3. So if you've ever been to Home Depot and tried to match a color, you know that it's super important to buy the amount that you need ahead of time, because you might not be able to match that again, although Home Depot has a pretty good process to match colors. So my independent variable is the number of gallons I need. The dependent variable to make the same color pink is the number of red paint, or the amount of red paint, and the amount of white paint. These are said to be related quantities. In order to make that pink paint, you needed a certain percentage or a certain quantity, a certain ratio of red paint to a certain ratio of white paint. Those 2 quantities are related, and they're also related to the number of gallons that you need. So a dependent variable can't exist by itself because it depends on the independent variable. So the example I'm using here is the difference between a random list of stuff and creating an independent and dependent variable situation. So if you go around your neighborhood and you just start measuring random cars, what you have is just a list of lengths of cars. For example, in this slide here. So the top one, I just have a bunch of numbers. The bottom one, I have identified Ford as number 1, Chevy is number 2, Nissan is number 3, something else is 4 and 5. And then I've measured my cars and put them in the correct column based on what kind of car they are. Once I have this information on my table, I can then associate a particular length of car with a particular manufacturer because I've created a relationship between the manufacturer and lengths of cars. Now I would like you to go to Google Classroom, and you have a sheet titled Identifying Independent and Dependent Variables. I will go through the first page with you, and then I would like you to do pages 2 and 3 as independent practice. So go to Google Classroom, and under the heading Independent and Dependent Variables, it says do one on your own or something like that. Okay, so we're going to compare the two quantities on the left and on the right. The number, and then we're going to identify them by putting an I or a D. An I stands for independent variable, and a D stands for dependent variable. So the number of minutes running and the amount of calories burned. The amount of calories burned depends on the number of minutes of running. So here we've indicated a D for the dependent variable, and here we've indicated an I for the independent variable. The next one says the grade made on a math test and the number of questions answered incorrectly. So the number of questions answered incorrectly determines the grade on the math test. So the grade on the math test is dependent upon the number of questions you answered either correctly or incorrectly. So I've indicated a D here and an I, here. The next one is the number of gallons of gas put in the car and the number of miles the car is able to drive. So which one is the dependent and which one is the independent? The number of miles a car is able to drive depends on how much gas you put in it. So I've indicated a D here and an I on this side. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at these sentences involving dependent and independent variables. So the weight of the wheelbarrow depends on the number of bricks. So which one of these is the dependent variable? If you answered weight, that's correct. The weight depends on, and what does it depend on? The number of bricks. So number of bricks will go in the second line, and weight will go in the first line. And the rest of these problems are identical to that.